Hello, everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Therapy Talks. It's Hailey here. Today, we have Huda Sajjad joining us to talk about her experience offering multicultural therapy as well as grief therapy. I hope you enjoy today's episode. It would be wonderful if you could talk about like grief therapy and how you practice within the sphere of grief therapy.
Yeah, I would say that I think, to be honest, post COVID and all of those experiences that we've had, I've had a lot more clients who've come in for the isolation that they've experienced and the kind of grief that's just so unimaginable and universal, but isolating at the same time. So, yeah, grief therapy or just working with grief and coping with loss has actually become predominantly one of the main themes that I see a lot of clients coming in with. Do you have a specific question about that?
Where do you normally take, so like say you're meeting a client and they're looking for some support around grief, where would you take that client or what journey would you take them on?
Um, I would explore some of the basic questions of, how long they've been experiencing this grief, um, what has happened in their life, recent events, just do a quick assessment of where they are right now. And from then I just really I think, like what we were talking a little bit about earlier, dispelling some of those notions around grief. I think that's also become such a topic that's filled with a lot of stigma. So allowing or making sense of it in a way that clients can give themselves permission to feel, to grieve, to understand that there is no straight path that you need to follow in order for you to be healed.
Mhm.
So it could, again, go many different ways based on the experience of that individual, but I think that's a really good place to start.
And so, what kind of strategies do you implement with someone seeking grief therapy?
Um, I think the strategies, more than anything, I would focus on some of the emotions that they've been carrying with them. I know there's a lot of EFT, so there's a lot of like heightening of the emotional awareness, but yeah, some of the strategies are just I think checking in is also really important at this point. I mean, ensuring that they have a really good support system. I do some of those basic safety planning kind of strategy around what do you need when you're feeling this low? What do you need to do when you're feeling completely disconnected from yourself and just consumed by the feelings of grief? Outside of that, some of the work we do in therapy is how do we channel these emotions for you to have some sort of closure? Because the biggest feeling of grief is that you no longer have this individual in your life and you're carrying so many thoughts and feelings, and just you feel like you will never be able to express that to them. So, bringing in some techniques of like, is it letter writing? Is it speaking to a photograph of a loved one? Um, and these are once again very taboo topics that a lot of us just don't like to discuss. Talking to friends and family after a point can just doesn't feel like they're understanding where you are, because there's also this kind of idea that after a certain period of time you should have moved on from the way that you're feeling. And friends and family, with the right intentions, of course, tend to push you in that direction. And with therapy, you can slow things down. You get to dictate how you would like to process these feelings.
Mhm. And so, you're really highlighting that a lot of the times, friends and families want someone to feel better and to feel more balanced, maybe to be more re engaged in their life. And so, they're pushing that grief process along quicker, but that person may not really want that experience. They want to maybe take things a lot slower.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You said it. I think it's just more a recognition of knowing that each one of us has our own paths and understanding what we need for ourselves, and pushing a person to heal sooner than they're ready to do so, it only further isolates them from their experience. it makes them feel like I'm not okay. I'm not functioning, quote unquote, normal. So what is it? Like, I'm feeling like I don't fit in with, with the people around me anymore. And that sense of loss, or that sense of misdirection, is often when clients land up at my doorstep. And that's when we start to make sense of, what is it that will help you? I think sometimes we forget that we should be checking in more than offering advice to people who've undergone a huge trauma in some ways of losing another person that they might never get to see again.
Hmm. And so you're kind of expressing the shame the person might feel for not having moved past that loss. And also just like that self-criticizing talk around, am something wrong with me if I'm still feeling this way, and etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up the word shame, because that is once again such a deep experience. And a lot of clients don't name that, but the shame and the guilt, like the survivor's guilt that a lot of people have when they've lost someone, is such a real feeling that it can be so overwhelming that sometimes you want to detach from that experience. You don't want to carry that with you because you just don't know how to make sense of that. And that inner criticism, like you mentioned, is also about, I should have. I should have done more. I could have saved this person more. I should have seen the signs, whatever it might have been. You're always kind of going into that bargaining stage in some ways and trying to negotiate, okay, what could I have done to avoid this situation? Or, why am I going through something like this? Um, and that's, once again, not a really healthy, but a totally normal way of examining your own grief. So whatever experience comes forward, I always like to tell my clients that go with it. It is such a unique and completely needed part of therapy, to go with whatever you're feeling.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. It's so often that we explain and help clients understand the experience of shame and how that really relates to the way that they show up for themselves and their relationships to others. And a lot of work that we do is like just encouraging people to feel what they're feeling and normalizing it and creating space for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Creating space for it is hard, especially if you don't have the kind of support systems that you need. Doing it on your own, because it's always great to, I think therapy is so beneficial in that way, because you're allowing another person to witness your fragility, your vulnerability. And when you do that, there is that shared sense of compassion. I'm going through this and I may never understand. Once again, I really want to put it out there that I may never understand what my clients might be going through. But understanding that this is such a deeply lonely and troubling moment for them, that the grief is so unfathomable that it feels like it might never end. That's the biggest thing about grief, that it feels like it may never end. And to sit with that in that moment is really challenging.
Hmm. For sure. And that's where we do our own individual regulation in session and outside of session so that we can be open and showing up with a good energy for our client. And so, in this discussion of grief therapy, is there anything else you're wanting to really highlight in your work that you offer?
I don't know if there's anything that I would particularly want to highlight, but I would definitely say to anybody who is struggling right now, and anybody who's found it really hard to cope when you're just grieving it, know that you're not alone. Reach out. It doesn't have to be therapy. It could be friends, family, or anybody who has a compassionate and supportive, um yeah, just find what you need to in those moments. There is a lot of twists and turns that you need to get to, and that eventually you will learn to live with your grief, that it won't
Hmm.
feel so big anymore.
It becomes part of life, not the entire life. And in a pace that's perfect for that person in the right intensity and timing, and it doesn't have to be quickly. Well, if you're open, I'd love to hear what your journey of what started your inspiration or passion towards providing counseling
Okay, we're going all the way back.
all the way back.
I think in terms of my inspiration, it would be, it sounds like a cliche, but it would just be to support people. I come from India originally, so there's a lot that you grew up around not understanding how it kind of fits into the structure of our society and not understanding why so many folks are ostracized. So I think just questions about social justice started to come up for me in my bachelor's. And from then on, it just became just a little bit of soul searching to understand how would I be a best fit to address these concerns. And I think from then on, it just, I found psychology, therapy found me, and it's just been a good match ever since then. So,
And so again, like your passion for it, with hearing about other people that maybe have supported you, seeing it in your bachelor's or undergrad, and kind of led you into the sphere.
yeah, for sure. And I think it's so inspiring to meet a lot of other professionals along the way who kind of nudge you in understanding, where to kind of go along on your journey. There's so much to discover. And as you can imagine, there's so much introspection that goes on for us therapists as well. So right, even before you start seeing clients, it's like a lot of self-reflection to understand who you are as a person, and how you could best support clients. So it's a lot of humility and grace that I think I bring into my, hopefully it echoes in my practice and my clients see that, but I'm just amazed and grateful that I get to do this every single day.
And you highlight a nice little thing there, like a little sneak peek that as therapists, we have a lot of thoughts and reflection before going into a session.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I think that just kind of speaks to the sort of inner reflective practice that we need to carry on. It's a huge part of my supervision as well. I like to journal after every session. I keep two different records, apart from my clinical practice. I also like to engage in a little bit of introspection about what am I carrying through at the end of the week, what is left and what remains to be unmasked for myself as a practitioner. So I think it's important for every therapist to continue in that practice, and it allows for, just a chance for us to be seen as human beings as well, right? Like it's not something that we don't have the answers for everything, and it's important that we show that. And I think it also creates that compassionate acceptance for our clients to just be as you are. And, you'll never know how you'll be able to find your answers that way.
Definitely. And how would you bring forth those reflective practices into your clinical offerings?
The reflective practice of
Mm.
looking
Yeah.
for answers.
Yeah. Like, so you sounds like you have your own individual thing that you're kind of doing weekly. Do you ever kind of modify that and share that with clients?
Yeah, a lot of my clients are, always we have such deep questions about kind of like existential themes, about finding meaning and purpose in our life. And I always go back to some of the simple, processes that I feel like is so key in creating habits that are long lasting. So just things like journaling every morning, doing mindfulness practices as well. Also just looking at key figures in our life that allow us to kind of be seen as we are in our fragility and in the way that we want to present ourselves to the world. So I think importantly, it's about checking in with ourselves and just knowing that you have people around you, a compassionate sort of circle of supportive friends that allow for those reflections to, I think, come up. So yeah, I think I learn a lot from my clients' practices than I teach them. And I think that's really important. So
Yeah. And I think sometimes clients will make jokes or like question, like, oh, how do you do this work with this assumption that it's hard work, which it is. But I think you just made a good point. Like, we as therapists learn a lot from our clients, and that in itself offers a great experience for us. It offers a really reflective and growth, and we're gaining so much from our clients, and we're being wowed constantly by their struggles and their overcoming of their struggles. And
mhm.
Yeah. And you were mentioning earlier that you work with a lot of diverse populations. Maybe you could share a bit more of the populations that you work with.
I see a lot of folks from indigenous backgrounds. I see a lot of folks from the South Asian diaspora, and yeah, and also folks from the Middle East. So there's a lot of folks that come in. I think it's important to be seen as a person of color, and I think it's important that we have practices, especially therapy practices that reflect that we are making space for all kinds of experiences. A lot of our information and knowledge has been Eurocentric, and it's important to kind of dismantle those structures to understand that there could be more name added to the experience that people of color go through. And unless and until we actually consciously create those spaces, it's hard for people to feel like, where do I fit in? I don't understand how this concept could apply to my particular background. So once again, it's all about just kind of having those conversations and really naming some of these structures really exist and have been part of oppressive practices for a long time. So looking within our field as well of psychology or be counseling, it's important to look at that and try to change the conversation.
Mhm. Could you give me some examples of what you're kind of speaking to?
So I think I'd have to be a little careful about looking at anonymity here of clients, but I think I get a lot of folks who come in from biracial backgrounds, for instance. As I said, I do a lot of couples therapy as well. So there's relationship conflict that comes about because of perhaps internalized phobia when it comes to race or culture. And that's not immediately evident. Nobody really comes up to your face and says things about race, right? It's just such a sometimes some of those subconscious memories you have, or just the ways that information has been passed down, maybe from your family of origin, how we were brought up, or the people that you were around, the information that can be consumed from media as well. So all of these kind of trickle down in the way that folks are communicating with each other. Um, and it's those moments that I really kind of like, okay, let's go back to psychoeducation here a little bit. That, we do have some internalized assumptions about people from particular backgrounds and particular um, cultures, and that may be actually at play here. That's why, and even stuff like microaggressions, right? These are things that are so subliminal that unless and until you walk in someone's shoes of really knowing that you have been disadvantaged as an individual just because you've been typecasted or put into a category as a person, that these things exist and that may be impacting how you go about with your day-to-day stuff. So that kind of answers your question. That was a big one. So
Mhm. I know for me, sometimes I ask a lot of our guests to really give specific examples because we can kind of just kind of gain more insight and awareness and understanding of these things, or even like when you're speaking to microaggressions and typecasting and these sorts of things, like that's just how my brain works. I like a lot of clarity in particulars, but you did answer it for sure. And so I guess my follow-up question would be is, so say you're working with a client that has experienced some of this, what you're speaking to, what would be your way of supporting that client?
I think I'll just talk a little bit about maybe picking about one of these things and providing a little bit more clarity about that. Yeah, I do have folks that come in and talk a little bit about, I, I, I am predominantly in a workplace that is um, white, that is male dominated. And I sometimes feel like I'm not fitting in well enough. I feel like I don't have a voice at the table. And a lot of that sometimes comes down to, performance anxiety or having perfectionistic tendencies about, I don't know if I'm doing my job well enough. So in situations like that, I think it's also useful to examine that sometimes we also carry some of that burden of what it feels like to prove a point as a person of color, you know, um, recognizing that you every question that you answer, every comment that you make has to be the perfect one, because you've made it at this table, and you have to have some sort of an opinion that actually holds weight to what you carry. So those experiences can be really daunting, especially for people of color. So we talk a little bit about, you know, power struggles in relationships, what happens in those moments, and how can you come to understand that the baggage that you carry may not necessarily be something that is evident in these spaces, that it should be honored, that the struggle is hard, it is challenging. So we really try to deepen that emotional experience of what it really feels like to be in those positions, what it feels like to sometimes not be understood, or feel like your voice is silenced, or it's not given the kind of weight that you want it to.
Mhm. Okay. And so you sounds like you're offering a lot of support, a lot of empathy, a lot of validation for that experience, and deepening, you're saying, that emotional experience. From that, where would the conversation go, or what would you apply to move that process forward?
I think the conversation then would go into really looking at, you know, uh, once again, just working with the identity of what your value systems are and what you're hoping will be the factor that carries this forward, right? I think every person, when they go through an experience like that, you feel really mishandled, you feel misunderstood. And anytime you take those steps forwards to making sure that you are catering towards your own needs, really listening into what's going on there for you. What do you need in terms of what needs to be addressed there to make you feel more connected to your inner purpose? And that's how you take every step forward. We come back to reflecting on your personal values, what it means for you to actually continue to work harder at just dismantling these ideas that we have out there. And with every person, I think there's also this recognition that it's empowering to know that you're creating space for a lot of other people out there who feel a similar kind of way, that you're not alone. I think the most biggest feeling that happens in those moments is that it's so isolating to be cast out, or to be taken in as not a complete, multifaceted personality, but just like one thing stands out for you, and that you're actually critiqued for something like that. So those experiences can be incredibly daunting and isolating. And so I think just naming those feelings and really talking about that, I think can be really empowering.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine what it would be like to be in that situation and be in a session with you, and like what your process is in terms of supporting that type of individual.
Yeah. We also do a lot of visualization work, sort of a guided imagery of the kind of experience you've had, being able to offer yourself compassion in those moments, understanding that you may not have it right all of the time, but learning from some of the things that you may not have received at that point in time, and offering that to yourself in terms of whatever that might look like, is really helpful for folks to move forward from that mental space. Uh, so yeah, and I think those reflective practices and really going into the narrative of what happened to me, and then stepping outside of that narrative as a third person to evaluate some of those decisions or opinions or feelings that came about, just really unpacking that, and I think is some of the work that kind of goes on in sessions.
Hmm. And so, where would you hope a client to end up after going through some of these discussions? Like, what are your hopes for them, or what are they hoping for by dismantling and discussing? And
I think that's a tough one to answer, because I don't think there's a complete switch in that sense. Like, healing, as we know, takes a lot of time. There is always a discomfort that I think you sit with when you have experiences like that. It's so tactile. It actually takes place within the body, and you can feel the weight of what you just experienced. So the hope from that is knowing that that felt sense reduces over time, that you're getting more comfortable with recognizing, first of all, that this happened to you, not that you caused it, but this happened to you. So that itself can actually be a little bit of taking that power back. Um, And just really, I think, working towards understanding that you're going to change the conversation. That in some ways, just because an incident happened that way, the next time you'll be better aware of knowing for yourself what you need to do in order for that experience to not be that consuming, I guess.
Hmm. Interesting, for sure. And I know you mentioned that you work with a lot of Indigenous populations here in BCE. Could you speak to that a little bit more?
I will say this with a little bit of a disclaimer. I don't work with a lot of Indigenous folks. I have received some amount of training for it, but I think I have worked a lot with biracial identities. Let me put it across that way, because I think it's important to understand that once again, healing and the way that we approach therapy itself can look differently for different people. And yeah, and I think taking that into account, it's really important to understand that not all practices can look universal. That what I may do with a particular client from a different background may not apply, and that's okay to talk about that as well. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just was curious because I haven't had spoken to someone on this platform before around like their experiences working with Indigenous populations. So I was just kind of curious what your experiences were or things that maybe you could speak to.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's not an area that I've fully gotten into yet. So I think it would be best for me to maybe hopefully be invited back and talk a little bit more about it. But yeah, in terms of working with Indigenous populations, I haven't really gotten into it as much. So yeah, we will skip that.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And so something else that we were kind of talking about prior to this episode was that you said some you have experience around navigating relationship anxiety.
Mhm.
Could you maybe speak to those experiences that you offer support with?
Yeah. So I work with couples as well as I do individual counseling around that. Relationship anxiety, I mean, I've been trained in the Gottman's method of couples therapy. And yeah, I think the best approach for that is just really understanding what attachment insecurities really come up in those situations. A lot of us are really blind to some of the baggage or the wounds that we carry on from our childhood. And that's kind of where most of the work takes place when it comes to relationships. I think understanding, what is it that gets recreated in your dynamic with your partner and how to focus on not getting tied down by the defenses that you show each other. That's the kind of the conversation that comes up with relationship anxiety. I find it so much better when I have a couple in the room and they're kind of like really getting into it. And those are the moments where you can really see the stuff that comes up and you realize that they're not even talking to each other in those moments. It's really a wound that's been recreated from the past about not feeling heard enough, not feeling seen enough, feeling abandoned, feeling insecure, feeling like there's no space for you in that relationship. So I think once again, there's so much to answer when it comes to couples work and relationship anxiety. But yeah, that's pretty much what comes to the forefront of my experience.
So, what would the Gottman's method say about supporting couples that are kind of working through those past hurts that they're bringing into their current relationship?
So I think the Gottman's method once again like really brings in a lot of that attachment research as well. We look at the different ways that folks have been hurt in their own childhood or in their own past, and really bringing forward that conversation with each other whenever they're comfortable, helping them understand what has gone on in terms of their past traumas, um, and trying to navigate that with each other. What does it look like? How do you show up for your partner when they're feeling abandoned or rejected? And we really try to understand. And I think the Gottman's method is really great in the sense that there is a lot of interventions and tools, and clients really appreciate that because you have a lot of quick methods that you can actually take away And in a moment of crisis, when you really kind of need to understand what's going on there for you, it's really useful to actually turn towards tangible kind of resources that can help you out in those moments.
Hmm. And so you're really trying to have them understand like their own experiences and like how that plays out in the present.
That's right. Yeah.
Hmm. And so if maybe you're working with a couple where one partner is experiencing relationship anxiety, how would you support that couple in that specific situation?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, you say you do a lot of couples work and use all of the Gottman's method, but say a couple is experiencing relationship anxiety and they're coming as a couple to see you and seek support. Like, what would you do in terms of supporting maybe one of those partners that is having that relationship anxiety?
I think first we'd have to define what kind of relationship anxiety they're facing. It could stem from such a variety of reasons that it really depends on what kind of conflict or crisis is going on for that couple at that moment. And that's a really good entry point into identifying what seems to be happening for both of them at that moment, what baggage from the past is perhaps coming up. Yeah, and that's kind of how I would go about addressing it. One of the other things that I also do is teach clients how to self-regulate or co-regulate with your partners. That's also really efficient. Um, because what happens when we're in that sort of a fight or when you're going at each other is that you're immediately just in a fight or flight response. So again, we just go back into a little bit about like the nervous system, what's happening in your bodies at that point in time. So taking a step back, self-soothing, understanding in those moments what you need to tell your partner, stepping away from the situation and re-engaging in a very focused on conflict resolution. I think those kind of things are just really essential, especially when you have like those big moments. And
Yeah. And what would be maybe some of your favorite co-regulation strategies?
um, I love breathing exercises. And again, there's so many breathing exercises like box breathing or just doing some sort of sensory awareness techniques. You just sit with your partner and you kind of guide each other into how to breathe in, how to breathe out. I love when you can kind of like hold each other's hands or even cuddle some sort of a physical sensation to help your bodies feel the natural rhythm of just returning to a normal resting heart rate, understanding what your breathing also is like in terms of not getting like caught up in a moment, like when I'm talking to you a little bit, that's a lot more fast paced. So stuff like that, I think is really great because, I mean, A, you're tuning into your body, and B, you're helping each other understand what you need in those moments. So it really offers that kind of a compassionate take on, once again, resolving this with each other rather than moving away from each other.
Hmm. Because so often that we have that flight response where we want to like run away or avoid or kind of just walk away from our partners, but you're really saying teaching them how to come together to actually have that conflict resolution. And so something else that we were kind of chatting about that you mentioned that you would be comfortable speaking to is integration of some more Eastern concepts of healing into like counseling and therapy.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I think once again, coming from India, there's a lot of spirituality. It's a place that has so many ancient traditions and different concepts when it comes to understanding health and wellness. So what I like to talk about with that is just allowing the person in front of me to teach me a little bit about, how did you have any kind of a understanding of what spirituality is? Was this a conversation that you had in your household? How has that guided your journey in understanding your beliefs about, you know, um, what is our meaning on this planet? What is it? What is your sense of purpose or direction? um, and just trying to understand if there was prior knowledge to that. And if there isn't, sometimes folks have curiosity about kind of diving into stuff like that. Um, and yeah, and I think I can speak a little bit about my own personal experience with spirituality. Or sort of diving into that. I think practices of meditation or yoga are such a big part of Indian culture, once again, that we never really started having these conversations until maybe like a decade ago in the field of counseling and therapy. So it's really interesting to me now that everybody is talking a lot more about like mindfulness practices when this has been a part of our culture and tradition for so long that it has been beneficial for folks who didn't even understand the Western concept of therapy, that you've already been engaging in practices like that has helped in like the mind and body connection. It helps in understanding where some of our fears are rooted in deeply and how to kind of navigate through those internal processes. So I think that's kind of my own personal take on spirituality. I think it's very personal to everybody, and we should make room for more opinions and dialogue about that rather than creating sort of one model approach in understanding that.
So you're really speaking to like how many cultures incorporated mindfulness and yoga and these sorts of practices, right? And now they're being incorporated into like what you would say is more like that Western or Eurocentric form of therapy. Yeah. And so what would you do for a client if they maybe don't have any associations to spirituality or things like that, but they're curious?
I would get started on exploring with them if they would be more interested in trying out some practices in session. I have a lot of meditation guides and I like to really kind of practice that with clients because it can feel kind of uncomfortable when you're not used to it. Um, and it helps to have another person to talk a little bit about your internal experience. So did it feel okay? Was that uncomfortable? Do you think that you might want to try it in a different way? So I think just starting off by a little bit of, let's see what that feels like for you. Does this feel like a good fit? And after that, I would just kind of teach them a little bit about meditation, just, grow in your understanding of what it is to feel like having a meditative practice in your life. How does that benefit you? How could you fit that into your routine? How could you integrate that into your own life? Yeah, I think that's been helpful so far.
And do you find you often have to dispel some myths around those practices?
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So sometimes when I have brought up these types of practices, the clients as an offering for emotional regulation or more connection to spirituality, they have a bit of negativity or inherent bias around these practices it's usually a negative bias. And so sometimes I find them opening up these conversations saying like, you can make your practice how you want to be. So I was just curious if you've also had that experience of helping clients to shift their perspective around some of these practices.
Honestly, I have not had that experience yet, maybe because the conversation has become so much more mainstream now that there's so much information out there. But I agree with you in terms of like making it your own, understanding how that kind of fits for you. It doesn't have to be one way of doing it. Each person's unique, your needs are different. Just kind of individualize that according to what you need at that point in time. Having said that, I forgot my train of thought. What was the question? Meditation, right?
Yeah, or just like dispelling some myths around it. Because sometimes I've brought up meditation, for example, and they go, "Oh, meditation!" Like they see it as like something that isn't that exciting, or it's kind of like hard to do, and so they're kind of immediately have this like barrier or block towards engaging in something like that.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, my other point about that was sometimes when I feel like there is ambivalence with that, it could also be when folks are very kind of in that hyper arousal anxious state. Sitting with your feelings is extremely uncomfortable. Going into recognizing what's going on inside of your body can often be counterintuitive rather than beneficial. So I kind of like to explore that itself, that maybe looking inside yourself is overwhelming at the moment. And maybe that's why that idea of kind of sitting down, because I think a lot of us struggle with that, just the way that our society has just been built up, sitting down for 10 minutes, it's like, who has the time for that? It can feel like we're just constantly going on from one thing to another thing that it it just doesn't fit in. So I think just opening up that conversation also has been kind of helpful, just going all the way back to what is meditation even, or why is this practice so popular today?
Just the psychoeducation around it. So it'd be great if you could actually share where people could find you if they're looking to maybe connect with you for your services.
For sure. I my practice, I think the website is counselingvancouver.com. That's the practice that I am at with two other women. So they could find me there and yeah, book a consultation with me, and I'd be happy to chat.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. I enjoyed hearing everything you had to share, and it sounds like you're very passionate about your work that you do.
Thank you. I appreciate this. I appreciate this opportunity. And yeah, I look forward to seeing more of your episodes that you're putting out. So
Yeah, for
excited.
sure. Yeah, thank you so much.